Namaste and welcome to a new episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. I am Ashish Chandorkar, your host for the day. Today we discuss an upcoming book which is titled Mission Shengzhan, written by Tuhin Sinha and Suraj Prasad, or Clark Prasad as he calls him as an author. It's a book to be released by Bloomsbury very soon. And we will discuss about what this book is and also the various geopolitical aspects of what's happening around us in the globe right now, which seems to be the inspiration for this book. Tuhin and Suraj, welcome to the podcast. So let's start off with a little bit of an introduction, right? Tuhin, if you can talk about what you have been doing so far and how did you become a writer? That would be very interesting to know for our viewers and listeners.
So Ashish, in our generation, we never aspired while we were growing up in school, we never aspired to become writers. So people who did not manage to succeed in other professions eventually ended up becoming writers. That's the best way or the simplest way to put it. So anyway, I came to Mumbai after, around 2001 to pursue a career in the entertainment industry. But the notions, there were no specific notions as such in the sense, I was still trying to figure out the different possibilities in life. And writing just happened because, it's easy to break into television as a scriptwriter, given the volume of work that happens over here on television. But while you wait for your time to write a movie, but then along the way, you also realize that, churning out episodes is more like a servicing job. The creative bend in you or the creative, hira in you gets impatient. And that is when around 2004, 2005, when I was trying to make it as a film scriptwriter, I thought that period coincided with the revival of the Indian publishing industry, in the sense, new authors came into the scene, and suddenly, for the first time, there was a definite interest in Indian authors and Indian books. So I converted one of the ideas which I had for a film into a book, which went on to become a bestseller in those days because in those days, there were very few Indian books still. So my first book came out in 2006. And I was pleasantly surprised by the massive success of the book. So I realized I have been gifted a new profession. I thought I should raise the bar. So I decided that the next 5 or 6 books should be very different from each other. So I decided every book of mine should cater to a different genre. So the next was a book called 22 Yards, which was a cricket thriller, which released in 2008, that was published by Westland at that point of time. And then the next 3 books were political thrillers / socio-political thrillers, one of which, rather 2 of them, delved into the transformation of a raped woman. There was a coincidence and a lot of things conspired to make that protagonist leader of the country. It was loosely, that book, The Edge of Desire, was loosely inspired from the idea of Mahabharata, which is, can the humiliation of a woman alter the destiny of the land? So post these 5 books, I did a book on Kashmir. I have in fact written a non-fiction book on parenting. I have co-authored a book with Shri Nitin Gadkari, which is called India Aspires, that was released in 2013. When the book was written when he was the president of the BJP, but it got released after when he was not the president at that point of time. In 2018, I wrote a book on Kashmir, which, incidentally, actually predicted the abrogation of Article 370 and Article 35A. But my sense was that it would happen somewhere around 2028, 2029. But, our great leaders ensured that it happened 10 years ahead of time. And post that, obviously, given my involvement in politics, I was consciously looking at nurturing a co-authoring model, which is when I came across Suraj, rather. Even I'm getting used to calling him Clark. And Suraj has written a book called Baramulla Bomber. He'll talk about that. But then the idea was to create a series on national security. In fact, the last book on Kashmir dwelt upon issues concerning national security. But, I mean, while the liberal mafia might dismiss our genuine concerns, I do feel that national security is an issue which is staring down at us. Of course, when I conceived the idea of the book, it had to do with a whole lot of Andolan GB alliances which one was witnessing across the country. But while we were still deciding upon the initial chapters, that is when the pandemic broke out. And, we had a lot of time suddenly, Suraj also had a lot of time because we were operating from home. And we just wondered, what if we actually make it more contemporary and induce the element of a bio war, which triggers this national security threat? And that is where, we got more ambitious. The book from being India-centric became, went on to many different countries. And the whole idea is, let's suppose, one country decides to inflict or start a bio war, and subsequently, because I honestly feel that the communist Islamist nexus is the biggest threat to the world. So what if that idea or that threat of a bio war gets merged with the larger Islamist threat which the world is witnessing? And how will that impact geopolitical equations around the world, especially when India realizes that the final target is India? So it has Indian protagonists, and yeah, it's the fight back story.
Right, great. Tuhin did not mention that he's also associated closely with the Bharatiya Janata Party. He appears on television very regularly as a spokesperson, so you might have seen him elsewhere, if you were wondering. Thanks, Tuhin, for that context. Coming to you, Suraj, is that a Paris Saint-Germain flag in the background along with the India flag? So,
yeah. So it's India, Switzerland, Germany, UK, lots of flags. So I just keep it. So there's a Vietnam flag also somewhere. So whichever country I travel, I just try to put it that way. So,
sure.
Yeah,
okay, great.
Now, that particular flag, not Paris Saint-Germain, that is, I believe, Bavaria.
Oh, okay.
Munich.
Right.
Yeah, Bavaria, Munich. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Suraj, I mean, why don't you, talk about how your interest in writing developed and how did you, shape up this story along with Tuhin?
Yeah. So, since childhood, a lot of books I used to read, whether it's Hardy Boys, Street Investigators, then moved on to various book of in terms of detective story, Sherlock Holmes, and also reading was always part of the habit. And but writing, I never thought I would be a writer. Now that happened just by accident. I saw this movie, Shawshank Redemption, and in that movie, without giving away some of the spoiler, when end comes in, people don't know what does it mean. I felt that even I need to escape from my catharsis, my life, and all, and do something different. And I said, okay, let me be an author. What topic should I pick up? Can I do some college romance, campus romance? And this is 2009. In that period, a lot of campus romance was there. So no, let me do something else. What if I try to see if can I solve the Kashmir crisis? What if I write a story around that, around Kashmir? And being from a background from both my parents being in the army, and both were, in fact, my father is a veteran of 71 war. So I grew up a lot of stories and news around heroism and different points of view also. So I went to Kashmir, no plan, nothing, spent a couple of weeks there, went towards Baramulla and all, and on top of a hill, Afarat Hill there, I actually felt the character building in me, and then I started writing. So it is just by fluke, a lot of rewriting, ultimately Niyogi Books. I thank them bottom of my heart for publishing the book Baramulla Obama. It was received well. A lot of different viewpoints came in terms of the storyline, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And somehow, next few years there was a break, and I didn't write a lot. But then, in terms of one of my good author friends, Dr. Sami Ahmed Khan, who's a science fiction writer himself, spoke about this companion of short stories coming in, and I just took part in it. Hatchet produced published that particular book, and my short story Mirror Rorim was published there, and that's where I would say the rebirth happened in a way. And during that same period, Tuhin interacted in 2019 and all. Then we started penning the story, and at that moment, slowly we started getting news of a particular sort of virus being in China, and we said that okay, what if this actually explodes, and what would the scenario then? So our original story was our India on the attack, and it had a biological element, but now we had more purpose to ensure to make it more geopolitically active, because in the end, a biological attack is not pertinent to one area but globally, and that's where it began. So that's a short history of the story, yeah, how it came about.
Right. So I had a question on how did you write the book together? I mean, typically what happens in a non-fiction setting is there could be multiple authors. They have their own areas of research. They can come together and piece it together post facto. But fiction sounds a difficult area to co-author a book, right? Because you may have different styles, different words to use. How do you transition between chapters? So, if you guys can talk about that, like how did you coordinate, and especially in the times of pandemic, I mean, when you couldn't have met anyway face to face.
So honestly, with the amount of anxiety which goes into a political career, physical writing takes a backseat. So I have to give full credit to Suraj for really doing the writing hard work. So my job was largely to conceive the plots, the chapter outlines, and beyond that, Suraj, if you visit his Twitter profiles, he calls himself a conspiracy realist.
Yes.
So beyond that point, I realized that even the chapter planning was not working. So I would largely look at chunks and where the story movement, which way the story is moving. What are the things we need to really get into, and what are the things we need to potentially avoid, so as to not get into a danger zone. But the bulk of the writing, or rather, the entire writing was done by Suraj. So I think it's because honestly, and in fact, there are two other books which I'm working on. You got to separate yourself. You got to separate the writing from the pre-production or the research work. The writing needs to be done by one person, otherwise it just doesn't, co-authoring doesn't happen. That's my experience. Or in a non-fiction book, probably the chapters can be divided because they're not connected. But in a fiction book, two people writing parts, I don't see how that can really happen.
The good thing is that once we decide an outline, and then Tuhin bought his experience and what would work, what not work, and then it's a matter of research coming together, and I would say a balance coming together, and that's where the new essence came in. Because in the end, it is a culmination of both the brains together out here, and we call it a national story, but this is more than nationalism. This is about the survival of the planet, I would put it that way. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So it can work. It does work out if there is a good harmony between the writers and co-authors. A lot of trust is required, and I thank Tuhin for providing and giving the trust and giving me feedback and hearing from me also very openly. And yes, it is time of the pandemic. WhatsApp is there. WhatsApp video calls were there, many, and WhatsApp calls were there.
So Ashish, my forte has always been to walk the tightrope between non-fiction and fiction. So even in my first book, which was a unconventional relationship story unfolding over a monsoon in Mumbai, much after it was written, people kept guessing which character is whom in real life. So that way, I think my contribution largely has been creating some very real characters. For example, you have one of the key characters in the book is this young vaccine manufacturer who travels all the way to the Amazon forests to figure out a certain combination of drugs for the vaccine for the present pandemic. Then you have a young politician who you will find enough prototypes of that particular politician. Somebody who believes in Hindutva, but at the same time has a more progressive and so a lot of these characters. In fact, there is one, a lady who heads a certain app belonging to a certain nation, and she is constantly under the scanner, because that app, besides what it is supposed to do, is big time into spying of politicians and their personal lives. So all of these characters, I think that was my contribution. But when it comes to writing, I think, the conspiracy realist in Suraj has taken it to another level. So that in fact makes it, if you actually have to describe it in as one single genre, it might be difficult, because there are elements of a medico thriller, there are elements of a espionage, international espionage thriller, and that is where I think I would much rather call it a medico espionage thriller, probably a cross between two different genres and a novel experience.
Yeah, we wanted to tell a story, so we see this as a story, and many other things we had planned out before, and things slowly started unfolding the same way as we wrote and before we wrote. So it's really surprising to see that some of the things which we actually wrote after 3 months, 6 months, to see that come in reality. Even we have gone to the extent of bringing in a new economic future where the US's central reserve currency goes away and the Chinese currency comes in top, and the rise of central bank digital currencies we put in as a chapter in terms of discussion around that. And just a few months ago, in fact, our book was already into print and went into the evaluation stage, on the editing stage. Those discussions happened. So it's I would say that a lot of discussion happened, and things started unfolding because we looked into various scenarios. What scenario could happen? And that's when we locked in the story and then moved ahead with it, writing, and quickly reached out to each other and closed it down quickly. So,
and another highlight which I want to mention is some brilliant conversations which take place in the book between the Indian Prime Minister and the US President.
Yeah.
So they're conversing with each other as though they have a plan to keep the world safe from a lot of exploits which another countries from.
So I mean, let's not, of course, give away the whole story of the book, of course. But I have two follow-on questions, and Tuhin, I'll come first to you. You talked about how you develop the characters, right? So typically, I mean, how does it work for the fiction works? Do you think that before the story is weaved in, you need to outline or underscore some of the key characters, their lives, their behavior, etc.? Is that how you start writing?
So, because I am a writer by default, much of my writing happens from, a personal assimilation of situations, assimilation of issues, and how those could be weaved into a story. So, in fact, the importance of characters can't be underscored enough in any story, be it a romantic story or be it, an espionage thriller or a pandemic story. So yes, I mean, creating some characters which really stand out, which are out and out gray characters. I mean, you can't possibly. They have shades of gray. They are not perfectly. They are perfectly imperfect. I mean, that's how I would put it. And because most of them are contemporary characters, I think a friend had once told me, more politics in personal relationships. Maroof sir is here, by the way. Good evening, Maroof sir.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, sir.
How are you doing, sir?
Good to see you. Thank you.
So I'll just complete, Ashish, this last point. So weaving, a friend had once told me that there is more politics and personal relationships than anywhere else. So the interplay between the personal and the political, how your personal equations between two friends or between a husband and a husband and wife impacts the larger political play out. I think I've enjoyed creating those situations, the interplay between the personal and the political.
Right. Great. We are also joined by Mr. Maroof Raza, who's a Indian Army officer and, of course, very popular TV panelist. We have all grown up listening to him on television night after night, analyzing defense situations. So thank you so much for joining us today for this session.
Thank you very much.
Right. Mr. Raza has written like a small blurb for the book. He's been associated. He reviewed the book, I believe, Tuhin. That's right.
Yeah. In fact, we are really grateful to him. He found time to read the entire book. and he had some very good things to say about him. So we're carrying his blurb on the book cover, a smaller blurb, and then a longer portion. The complete portion appears inside the book.
Right. Right. So we will come back to Mr. Raza, but I had one question before that for Suraj.
Yep.
Suraj, so my question was on the domain side, right? You mentioned about bio warfare, medico thriller, CBDCs, reserve currency. So a whole bunch of concepts kind of packed in, which are by themselves quite technical and quite. I mean, these are like very specific things. So how did that part got kind of weaved in the story? I mean, what was the research like for that? How did you create a story about concepts which are not that well known right now, like CBDCs, for example, right? So what was the research like for that?
Yeah. So one thing is that I've been an introvert. I'm honestly an introvert, and I always been reading. So you can see, I can't span you through the whole entire book. There's 2 walls of books out there, and that has been kept me a company. And the point is about when you think of a scenario in the future, and then you understand that this is a plausible outcome, then there's enough material out there to understand and read. The challenge was that try to make it as relevant to the story and also something relevant to Indian readers, and then global readers to understand. So a lot of research did go into it, and this research included not only reading books and literature reviews of, I would say, published in Google Scholar and all, but also various YouTube channel videos of various point of views were taken, because there's always a pros, there's always a cons. We have to bring in both the perspective in. So it took time, but over a period of time, we decided that, I mean, in fact, the first draft, which was completed sometime in December 2019 and January 2020, that period, some of the stuff was too much on the research side heavy, so which we sort of cut it down to make it more relevant and faster. So that's my answer to it.
Right. Thanks. So let's come to Mr. Razad. So thank you so much for being on Bharatvaarta today. We wanted to hear from you. How did you get associated with this book, and what was your experience reading it and reviewing it for the authors?
Well, one of the people who continues to connect with me from Bloomsbury is Mr. Nitin Valecha. He's a very fine man. He had reached out to me earlier for a book on Kashmir. So I put him on to the person I felt who had done enormous amount of unusual research onto it, a person called Iqbal Malhotra. And Iqbal and I had put together a documentary series on Kashmir, which then became a book, which I believe for 1 year at least was on the top of the Amazon bestseller charts, called Kashmir's Untold Story, published by Bloomsbury. And then Nitin suddenly reached out to me for this one. I was actually on my way to Jaipur for an event that I was organizing. So it was in the car that I managed to have a conversation with Mr. Tuhin Sinha. And I said, fine. He's an extremely polite and warm gentleman. I had known of him through TV debates, though I'll be honest, I don't watch much TV, but sometimes you do watch and some names stick out in your mind. So I said, fine. They sent me the manuscript. I had been a very busy man because I myself just finished a book on China. So I was struggling to complete my own book, which Bloomsbury is not publishing, but Westland Amazon is. But I have regard for Bloomsbury and Nitin. And I said, fine, I'll do it. But, I don't like to comment on any work without doing my homework. That's in my nature. So I read the whole book. They sent me a soft copy. And to reduce everything down to one paragraph is a difficult job. But I picked out what I thought were the very unusual elements of the book. One was, as the authors have told you, it's done phenomenal amount of research. They've connected the present to the future, and the future is now. That's what the book brings out. That you're staring at a horrible scenario which is going to unfold if, unfortunately, the orchestrators of this virus, which I believe are the Chinese, allow it to go to the next level if they don't achieve their agenda. And that's what the book brings out, that if they decide to scale it up, how does it go there? And of course, there is a lot of uh, interpersonal stuff. There's a lot of global capital hopping from Istanbul to Beijing. Of course, Delhi is there and some other capital cities, and how these spy networks and others work towards. But it's a very India-focused book. So how to put India in a spot, because that we all understand, those of us who are students of geopolitics, that China sees India as the game spoiler for China in Asia. And so therefore, the whole plot is weaved around how China wants to put India into a spot in a variety of ways, from an attempted assassination to spreading more virus. And this is, it's important for those people who don't read serious geopolitics to get a hang of what's happening in the world. This damn virus has not come from anywhere. I argued in an article in Open Magazine on 3rd of April last year that it's come from a lab. Right. And everyone dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. And 3 days ago, I read in the newspapers, a lot of top scientists are insisting that China must provide more evidence why it has come from a lab. And even The Economist has hinted at that more recently in an article to say the dots can be joined, but China is not letting them join. Why China wants to do it? Because it's prepared for the outcome, but others are not prepared. And that's why you're seeing the large economies of the world crumbling in front of the Chinese, and they can barely lead the world because they can't lead their own people. So this is the kind of scenario we are in. The world's not going to be the same place anymore. And even if you think you can overcome this, you need to understand this to understand the future, because the next phase might come more violently and sooner than you imagine. So that's what the book is about.
Right. Great. That's a fantastic summary, sir. I mean, I think I also got a chance to read the soft copy, and I completely agree. I had to. I couldn't put it down actually. Once I started reading it, so I spent like half a night, and 2 half nights to kind of finish the book. In a quick fashion. Sir, one question. You spoke about geopolitics and the present real situation, right? So outside of the book, how do you assess today's world? US and China, sometimes friends, sometimes enemies. India's place in the world. What's your general assessment of what's going on around us?
Well, the world is not what all the pundits had thought it would be 2 years ago. The world is not going to be hereafter 2 years later what we are thinking it's going to be now. It's going to be a world which will present a lot of challenges to the people and to the leaders of the world, because the fact is that I believe China is working to a plan. The plan is 2020 last year was meant to be the anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party that runs the country. Everything comes under the Communist Party. And President Xi Jinping had promised that by 2020, he'll try and double China's GDP or China's way of living 100% better than what it was 10 years ago. And to achieve that, they needed massive economic clout, which would come if China dominates the global narrative. Now, yes, half of the world's economic interplay is now dominated by China and India, but China is leagues ahead of India in terms of sheer numbers. So China was put in a spot by President Trump 2-3 years ago by various trade restrictions, and that upset to some extent Mr. Xi Jinping's game plan. I would argue that speeded up their decision to give it back to the West. And giving it back to the West was this card they held under the table that they pulled it out. And how it happened is when they reach out to the global economies with the virus, You saw everything crumbling. You saw all these countries that have spent decades preparing for a nuclear conflict, unprepared to handle a virus. And Chinese efforts to try and take this to the next level, because they know that the world's economy largely is dependent on their supply chain links. So they will remain a key player, at least for the next 5-10 years. But what they want to achieve by 2050 is to be the most powerful country in the world, economically and militarily. They'll probably get there. Because as I wrote to the introduction of a book called Red Fear, which is published by Bloomsbury, by my co-author of Kashmir book, Iqbal Malhotra, and it's a very extensive introduction, in which I argued, see, they have presented now to the third and the developing world a model which the West can't present. See, West can keep talking about free economies, free trade, economic growth, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, they are systematically moving in that space to control the global narrative, which the West is unable to get a leadership together to control it. So therefore, China is there to stay, and China will remain the most important player, both economically and militarily. Though in sheer military terms, I mean, America is far ahead. But this is the point that you need to understand between India and China, China and America and everybody else. Everything can't be reduced to counting guns and missiles. It is your ability to upset the established order that itself is damaging enough. And that is what China is capable of doing. And that is what the West has no answers, because I'm sure their intelligence agencies have all identified that the damn virus came from a lab in Wuhan, which is China's lab, which is grade 4 lab, which is the highest level they have, and there's just a few hundred meters from the wet markets. And that is where it was probably leaked by, and there are people who've defected from China and given interviews in New York and all that to say that. So that's, to my mind, is more or less in place. But what the West has no answers for is the dependence the world has on China to provide a whole lot of stuff. Pharmaceuticals, cell phones, computer chips, air conditioners. I mean, India itself has about 90% dependence on all these issues on China. So you can make all the noises about we will control Chinese imports into India, etc. वो थोड़ा बहुत चलेगा. But in reality, you can't stop it all. Unless your people are willing to go back to a state of play in the 80s, where you don't have access to these things as easily as you've got used to now. And that no economy is willing to take a chance. And also, I mean, global economies, which are you got used to, designer bags, fancy, I mean, Louis Vuitton and all that stuff is made in China. Yeah. I mean, from Milan, there are 3 flights a day to Wuhan. So where does Milan make these products? They get made there, they get labeled in Italy and get sold. So all those things that we think the West had in control really doesn't have in control. And the Chinese work to a plan. They don't come up with this thing yesterday. They've probably been planning this for decades. And they've already planned what they're going to do for the next few decades. We've got to ask ourselves a question that beyond debating and beyond all this faffing that all our bloody policymakers do, what's your plan for the next 10 years? Do you have a plan? I don't think so.
Right. So, sir, one related question here is, you spoke about supply chains, and of course that's the most critical aspect of this whole equation on availability of goods and their, guaranteeing their availability, right? We've been talking about the Quad initiative, where the US, Japan, Australia, India have come together There are some talks about India not as a, let's say, a substitute for China, but as a maybe a backup or a like let's say a fallback for option for some supply chains. So is that practical at all, or I mean, do you see Quad coming up as a like a powerful counter to Chinese narrative or Chinese hegemony? Is that something which is possible?
See, to start with, my view is Quad is overplayed and overrated. I wrote about 10 years ago to say if China puts strings of pearl around you, like ports like Gwadar in Pakistan, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Sitwe in Burma to surround you, then you surround China with friends diplomatically in Asia. I mean, Vietnam, Japan, Korea, etc., and make them feel the pressure. But as far as Quad is concerned, see, all of them are fighting shy of naming China as your real enemy. What they're trying to say is that, we want freedom of movement in the seas. I mean, that's a big deal. You don't need to have such a lot of hype about freedom of movement in the big seas. Because quite frankly, if China stops American shipping, or even Indian ships, though India really doesn't do much shipping beyond the Straits of Malacca, which is near Malaysia, Singapore, because that's where American shipping and Japanese shipping needs to go past that to carry the oil from the Middle East to those countries and trade, etc. Because more than 1/3 of the world's shipping trade takes place on that route. If China even bothers or dares to stop it, the collective naval might of America and some of its friends like India and Australia will blow the Chinese Navy to smithereens. They may be large in numbers, but capacity nahi hai to fight a full-fledged naval battle. Even now, the Indian Navy can blow a hole through the Chinese blockades in the Straits of Malacca. But we'll have that edge for a year or two, not forever. So the Quad, what is it trying to do? It's, to my mind, it's become a bit of a dance of democracies. So it's gathering all the countries together in what the Chinese have called an Asian NATO, which is a collection of military, political, strategic alliances to surround China. China is not happy about it, perhaps even nervous about it. But it's not going to lead to any do-or-die solution to China's territorial ambitions in South China Sea. Where is the South China Sea? The South China Sea is that big patch of sea between the ASEAN nations. That's Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, that block. China has defined that area, what it calls the 9-dash line. It has just gone and made an international naval boundary and say, outside of that line is my territory. And all these guys were sleeping when China acquired a lot of the islands there and made naval bases, runways, etc. there. So China is pretty sorted out there. Now what China is doing, whoever it can threaten in that area with the shipping activity or India's oil exploration activity along with Vietnam outside that country's territorial waters, which is normally about 20 kilometers. So the Chinese ship come and start shouting at those people, go away, and put pressure on them. So that is China's way to retain dominance there. Because eventually they believe that sea was theirs 223 years ago. 223 BC. So that's 2,200 years ago. I mean, to that extent, you don't know what India would claim as part of China 2,000 years ago. I mean, there are different claims. So where China wants to use history, it does. Where it doesn't want to use history, it doesn't. So what the West is trying to do, and they've got enough rulings from the International Court of Justice to say that UNCLOS must be respected, which is United Nations Conventions for the Laws of Sea, which means naval movement should be allowed. So उसी पे ज़्यादा थोड़ा जोर है Quad का, but what Quad is really focusing on is
have a post-COVID collective approach to dealing with pandemics and emergencies that Japan, Australia, India, US, and there's Quad Plus, which is Vietnam, South Korea, and some others join in to pool in their resources to deal with emergencies like the COVID. The other thing that Quad is looking at is to create a reasonably decent military counter to China if it takes on a more aggressive tenor in South China Sea and East China Sea. You see, in East China Sea, China has a problem with some of the waters and territories between Japan, Korea, and China. That's a historical thing. There are islands they call Senkaku, Deyayu, etc. They're bloody rocks, but the argument is who do the rocks belong to. But those are one set of issues. Then is the South China Sea. And where China has moved in now is the Indian Ocean. So Indian Ocean is not India's ocean anymore. And so the Chinese have moved in. They have submarine activity happening around Sri Lanka. They've bought off a port city of Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka couldn't pay the debt. Ambatota. They bought off patches of Maldives Islands. Maldives, as you know, is made up of 1,192 islands. So for Maldives to sell a few islands for a few billions is not a bad idea. And China gets a base there. They've made a military base there in Africa, a place called Djibouti. Now, how they've done it, and India is a bloody culprit to it all, because we supported China's case to come into the Arabian Sea to fight piracy. You remember some years ago, a lot of ships used to get hijacked. So we supported. So on the pretext of piracy, they came in, and they've come in with submarines, military men, and all. They put a marine brigade also. So they are from the Horn of Africa right up to coast of Japan. They are there, and they're not stopping there because they've got territorial ambitions in Africa. They made a lot of money investments there. They've got a naval base in Pakistan called Gwadar. They've completely owned it, so they have a full-fledged base there. So what you saw as the British and the European empires in the 17th, 18th century, and which put China on a dock, and they destroyed the country and made him a bunch of opium addicts. If you go back to the history of China, they're going to do the same to Asia and Africa. And they will take on America separately because it's the damn West which funded their economy, hoping stupidly that when China becomes rich and wealthy, it will become like the West and it will adopt democracy. But they have a counter narrative to democracy and they are using it. So that is the big game.
Right. It's quite fascinating. I think that's a lesson in geopolitics in a few minutes in what's happening around us. Sir, I had one, because we spoke about this topic. I have one more follow-up question. The Israel-Palestine conflict, right? I mean, that's come out of nowhere. Things weren't looking as on the boil, let's say a few weeks ago, but suddenly it has flared up. Do you think it's connected to the more recent events, or is it something which is just happening independently?
Which conflict?
The Israel-Palestine conflict, which is going on.
That's an old issue. See, please understand historically, the Jews were cursed by their own prophet, Prophet Moses. And though biblically they're regarded as God's own chosen people, it was said that they'll never be at peace. And it's really, at this point of time, you have Mr. Netanyahu, who's politically fighting for survival within Israel, because there are questions whether he'll be allowed to make another government. I think Israel's already had 4 governments in 5 years. So to divert attention from the politics within the country, he was looking at straws in the wind. Now people would argue, but Hamas attacked them, Hamas is terrorists. The bigger question is, and if you go into the theories of just conflict, just war, which is what the West teaches you, and Netanyahu is a product of Harvard, so he's probably learned it also, that how do you justify a war against innocent people, unarmed people? You can't give a justification for that. You've left the Palestinians unarmed and you're bombing the hell out of them. Why? Because the Hamas is supporting them. Okay, Hamas is an extension of the Iranian state. But why is Iran an evil state and Israel not an evil state? Because Iran took on America in 1979, and in sheer frustration with the American games they play, and you can see a lot of it on American TV itself. You can watch series like Homeland and others and see the games they play all over the world, from Afghanistan to Iran and everywhere else. Basically, the Iranians took over the American embassy in Tehran. And that has been drummed in the American mindset from 1979 that Iran is an evil state. Now, fine, even if you go by that argument, why is it that one nation state that supports a political narrative and uses force to counter the excessive force? You see, in all conflicts, a thumb rule is always established that the use of minimum force at an escalating level. Now, if people gathered in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, why is it that you had to go hammer and tongs with fighter jets thereafter? I mean, for example, we...
So you went on mute actually, if you can. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
We have a problem in Kashmir. Do you think we use fighter jets there? And let me tell you, our troops have also faced very trying situations. But we have never used air power against insurgents or otherwise. Pakistan has against Balochistan. I mean, that is crossing the threshold of dealing with low intensity conflicts. Low intensity conflicts are conflicts beyond an act of war. And you don't use air power there. So you say Iranians are the evil state because they are supporting the Palestinians. What about the Palestinians who nobody is bloody well supporting? Even the Arab brothers have abandoned them. There is a debate now in the Arab world about who are with the Palestinians, who recognize Israel. And that's a debate that's happening at the UN Security Council and elsewhere. But the problem is that the Israelis have always controlled the narrative because of the huge support they have in America, in the press, in the financial agencies, and in the American government. Might interest you to know that American Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, is also a Jew. So the fact of the matter is, you can keep saying the other guy is evil, but is the other guy evil per se, or your acts not corresponding to his as evil also? Now there's a last element to it. See, Russia is a growing player in the Middle East. For too long, the narrative in the Middle East was left to Washington to handle. But Russia is a growing player there. And China is engaging extensively economically with Iran. They've signed a 25-year deal with Iran for oil for $400 billion. So you can keep having embargoes against Iran. The Chinese will pay them for oil. वहीं से पीछे से ले जाएंगे through Central Asia. समुद्र का रास्ता भी नहीं चाहिए. Bandar Abbas and all be damned. So therefore, Iran's not going to go hungry in a hurry. And Israel is not going to be able to get to Iran despite all the plans they have in place. The Israelis have been looking to go and bomb Iran again. But they can't bomb Iran's nuclear facilities because the Iranians are masters at construction. It's a land of earthquakes. And they know how to build things which are earthquake-proof and bomb-proof. And all their damn bombs and shelters are way below where American mother of bombs can go. So therefore, you can bomb Iran, but you can't bomb their nuclear facilities. And Iran's argument is simple, that we are operating within the threshold. So either you engage with us under the rules you had crafted, or we'll carry on doing it because now we've got two other friends, Russia and China. So the new geopolitics in South Asia, West Asia, is the geopolitics between how much America wants to get engaged and how extensively Russia wants to take charge of the situation. And the Chinese are going to fund it. So it's a complicated game, but if you understand the basic contours, you won't get confused.
Right. No, I mean, absolutely, riveting narrative that, sir, with all the complications which we see around us. Tuhin and Suraj, maybe we can talk about the present and in the book's context. I think, like as Mr. Raza set up a huge context around how the countries are interacting with each other. When you were writing the book, how did you decide what is real and what is fiction, right? How do you separate that, and how did you draw a line at all between the reality and the fiction?
Well, we did. Yeah, Tuhin, go on.
Fictionalizing real incidents makes it a little more palatable to a wider section of readers. That's about the only thing we have done. So we do anticipate that there will be, probably like Suraj was mentioning the other day to me, that, our Twitter accounts might just get hacked. So we're prepared for that. But like I said, I mean, the issues are very pertinent, very real. We have fictionalized it from the point of view of cinematic adaptation. You will find one single protagonist ruling the roost, General Deng Jintao. So, if because a subject like this anyway lends itself to cinematic adaptation. So with a single larger than life protagonist, General Jintao, that becomes easier. But I don't think there is any amount of reality that has been compromised. But also what has been established is that there is a deep state across the globe which is closely connected with each other. So there is a deep state in the US, there is a deep state across the Middle East, which is working in close proximity with the communist powers, and which is making things more difficult for the other side. You will see that in ample incidents across Europe. So yes, I mean, it's all of the real elements are there. It's just that they are fictionalized adequately for a wider reader outreach.
Right. Suraj, you want to add anything?
No, just want to say that it's very difficult to say right now what is real, what is fiction, and things are just getting merging together. So we wanted to tell a story, we told it as fiction, and things are getting real. So can't say anything more than that.
Right. Cool. No, we've had a wonderful discussion. Maybe I can just show the cover, of the book, which our readers would like to, listeners would like to see that we've been discussing. That's the cover of Mission Shengzhan. So, Suraj, when does the book release actually? Do you have a date for it?
June 20, it should be out. It's going into print. Nikhil, Nitin would be, the best person to tell you. I think it's going into print in a day or two, and it should be out mid-June.
Yeah, I think just to be precise, it's going to be 18th June.
18th June.
18 June.
I think Bloomsbury believes in numbers.
Numbers 1, 8, 9, 9, and 6.
Actually, a reason behind it, but anyways, this is not the time to discuss. So there is a good reason behind that.
Right. Okay, wonderful. So I think we have had a great discussion about the book and the larger context here. We, on behalf of Bharatvaarta, Tuhin, Suraj, I really wish you best for the book and to the publishers, Bloomsbury. I hope the book does well. And I've read it, so I can personally testify, like Mr. Raza did, that it's a fantastic book. It's a great read. But I really hope that people pick it up and enjoy the writing.
Thank you, Ashish, for this wonderful session. Thank you, Maroof sir. I know you've not been well, but the passion that you show every time we discuss geopolitical issue is extraordinary. We've been hearing you for the last 20 years, and I think we've all drawn our lessons in geopolitics from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maroof sir.
Thank you,
Thank
Nitin.
Thank you, Ashish.
Nitin and Praveen have been brilliant as publishers. Thank you, Bharatvaarta. Thank you, News Bharati. Siddhi, you have. Maroof, so this entire discussion will also be simulcast, will be released on Thursday and simulcast on a news portal called News Bharti. So Siddhi is also part of this discussion. She handles News Bharti. Thank you.
Yeah, I was about to say that we will release it shortly. I mean, the date is on 20th for this discussion to go out. 20th of May at 5:30 p.m. This, we'll all be watching this discussion. News Bharti is our partner for this conversation, and the viewers and listeners on both the platforms, Bharatvaarta and News Bharti, will be able to watch it simultaneously. Thank you so much, Mr. Raza, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.